Hello, and welcome to my final presentation. I've titled it Understanding Weirdness Through an Inquisitive Lens, an Introduction to Guadalupe Maravilla's Disease Throwers. I saw this series while researching for another project a bit ago, and it really intrigued me, so I really wanted to kind of dive into it with this assignment and just kind of look at how maybe we can better teach art like this, weird art in the classroom. So I'm going to walk through how to implement kind of an approach like this while demonstrating also the basic structure. So throughout the presentation, I'll be asking questions about the artist. So feel free to answer them in your head to get kind of a personal feel for how being in the classroom while this approach is happening would feel. So this piece is called Disease Thrower number 5 in the series. So the big question to start with is what questions are you actually asking about this piece? I feel that in my experience in school and also observing schools, that the classroom really prioritizes answering questions rather than asking questions within the student body. But by allowing students to be curious and investigate a piece of art before having to provide insight about it, I feel like allows more room for creativity and more room for artistic observation. So this really kind of focuses on a student-centered classroom rather than a teacher-centered classroom, and it I feel like would encourage students to take charge of their own learning rather than just being instantly fed this information when presented with a new piece of art. So here is a more zoomed in view of this piece of art. Um, and the second question we would ask our students is, what do you notice first? I feel like in my experience, I've always been asked, what do you like and what do you not like? But in my opinion, this kind of prompts judgment rather than curiosity, as it forces us to make judgments and form biases before we even understand what is going on in the piece, like saying what we like and dislike before we even know what's happening. So asking students what they notice first rather than what they like and don't like is kind of a low stakes question that leads to further visual exploration. Because what do you notice first? The next question would obviously be, well, what do you notice second? Dive deeper into the piece, look into it. What do you notice next? What's sticking out at you next? So I think that is a more interesting and judgment-free approach rather than what do you like, what do you dislike. So now we're kind of gonna get into more about the artist himself. We've asked the questions, we've been curious. Um, so by having time for students to sit in that curiosity, sit with that work before being told about its history, like I said, allows them more time to be curious and synthesize their own ideas rather, again, than just being fed those ideas. Um, so Maravilla's work really reflects on his own displacement from El Salvador to the United States in 1984. He was an unaccompanied minor fleeing El Salvador for the States. Um, the Civil War, actually. His work draws from indigenous and contemporary systems of knowledge, blending craft, medicinal materials, and plants, along with commercial and ready-made objects. So we're seeing this piece again, we're looking closer. There's sort of this anatomical model of like a lung, there's this big glass orb, there's this gong that kind of sits above everything, and we'll get into that more later. But this is kind of just a very basic overview of his work. And then talking about curation, I if I had to curate almost like a field trip to a Meravia gallery for this almost lesson, this unit about him, I would definitely use a room with a lot of natural light as it would feel less sterile and I feel like more comfortable for the students. I would arrange the work at their eye level. I feel like a lot of times in museums, there's sort of this like professional. grown-up area, and then there's a more like toys and slides kids area. But that would not be how it would be in this museum. Everything would be at the child's eye level. Everything would be easily accessible to see, to fully visually explore. And I would freely allow them to explore the space. There would be no, excuse me, left to right, look at this work, look at this work, look at this work. They can go to whatever interests them, free reign of the space. Of course not touching, but just allowing them to fully, again, make this learning their own, take charge of their own learning. Um, and then also I've seen in a few museums a lot of prompts on the wall, which the study I've cited here talks about that too. Interpretive prompts in the form of curatorial descriptions were made available to the participants, contributed both to an increase in understanding and a liking of critical art. That's a quote from the study. So having these prompts on the wall to prompt thinking allows a deeper understanding and a deeper thinking of the art. So I would also include that as well. And what's pictured here, what I included, these people laying on the ground, they are actually participating in the like sound bath experience. As I mentioned, these works do have gongs in them, and we'll get into a bit how Meravia focuses on healing a lot in his work, and this is kind of the experience of that sound healing. So, some other intercurricular connections that could be made with this is obviously historical. Um, Maravilla talks a lot in explanations about his work of a lot of the systemic abuse of immigrants, a lot of xenophobia, and how, as we can see today, I mean, he fled El Salvador in 84, but as we can see today, there is still a lot of that xenophobia happening towards people coming to the United States. So for Maravilla, telling a story is, he says, almost as important as the object itself. He talks about survivors of trauma, personal, intergenerational, and historical trauma. Storytelling is a matter of life and death, which I find personally really interesting. He began making the disease thrower sculptures in 2019. And like I said, each has the gong and other instruments too, that create these vibrational frequencies. So as I have listed in the themes here, he's pretty big on multisensory healing. Um, he also was diagnosed with cancer, which he attributes to kind of a physical manifestation of the trauma he endured as an immigrant and a refugee coming to America. Um, and he almost sees these disease throws that he creates as ritualistic objects, which I think is very interesting. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. These are the links to my sources, and this is just my short kind of explanation about why I chose these sources. Thank you so much. Bye.